All right, so let's talk about hooks. Yeah, hooks is a new way of coding with React. Very controversial. We could be talking about hooks, state, and the side effects for hours, right? I'm not going to go very deep on that. So just FYI, historical or not historical, but classic JavaScript developers, yeah, I consider myself a classic JavaScript developer because I've been doing it all my life. We never really like classes. Yeah? If you ask hardcore JavaScript developers, they don't really like classes because they say they go against the principles of functional programming. However, once JavaScript started becoming more and more popular, 2009, 10, 11, more and more backend developers started to move to JavaScript, to the front end. And the first thing they realized is that they didn't have classes. Yeah? You imagine a Java developer without classes, a C# developer without classes. That was a bit of shocking, right? Because of that, they made a bit of pressure just to bring classes to JavaScript, and actually that happened in 2015. So now you can create classes in JavaScript, but still, classic JavaScript developers, they didn't like it either, right? Based on that, there have been some efforts towards minimizing the dependency with classes. And React is a good example. When React was firstly introduced in 2014, the only way to create stateful components was with classes. You remember state components? Yeah, we talked about that on Friday. If you don't remember anything on Friday, don't drink that much on the weekend, guys. All right. So, but even though that works, it's the way React has been working for 4 or 5 years. Again, many people is against that. And one of the reasons is the complexity of dealing with lexical this. Not sure if you remember on Friday I told you how to bind a button with a function in React. You need to do few weird things because otherwise it wouldn't work. We'll talk about lexical this on the last week of the bootcamp. It's one of the most complex aspects of JavaScript. Yeah? Eventually you can deal with it. You can control it. But it is complicated. And coding tends to simplify things, right? So even if you can understand it, if you can understand how it works, if there is a way to not to depend on your ability of understanding lexical this, yeah, let's go for it. And this is what hooks are about. So hooks enable, by the first time, a way to hold state into stateless components. And this is where things start getting a bit mind-blowing. So now we can do stateful in stateless. Yeah? That's why they call it hooks. That's a way to, establish a bridge between these two worlds. If that any helps, hooks or stateless components are quickly replacing classes, Yeah? This summer, we ran the big event with, I think, was 55 senior React developers, some of the top developers in London. We ran a React challenge. And I noticed that literally nobody used a single class, nobody. And that should tell you where the trend is going. Yeah? I never do classes anymore neither, as part of coding. Yeah? So, still, it's very important to understand how classes work. Yeah? You may have to work with legacy code, which means code that was written 6 months ago, right? But in the long term, you are likely to deal with stateless components or functions. So look, what you can see, this is essentially what we did on Friday, if you remember. So we created a simple app that displayed a message, are you sexy? No, you are not sexy, and after 3 seconds, yes, you are. That's what we built on Friday. And if you remember, so we created a class, am I sexy? And then we played a bit with some callback methods, the constructor, the component did mount, and the render. Remember that? So what I would like to do now is I would like to rebuild the same component using hooks. This example was fairly simple. Yeah? You have a default state, and after 3 seconds, you change the state. Yes, upstream. So I would like to do that again, And afterwards, I would like also to replicate the second example where we play with a button. You remember? I click on a button, and then it told you if you were sexy or not. It was a toggle. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So this is the workshop of the day. So first of all, I'm going to leave that class here for reference purposes. So I'm just going to rename it. Am I sexy old? And now I create another one that is the one I'm going to export. By the way, and I notice this is the way React works. I don't really like that, guys. Look. So I have a class called Am I Sexy, right? Is this class being exported? I don't know. I need to scroll down. Well, not this one, but I'm exporting the app, you see? So I personally don't like defining, I don't mind if it's a class or a function, and then exporting some of these at the bottom. I don't like that. I prefer to do that. Export default. Inline. So for me now it's much easier to see which is the public interface of my component. All right, so this method is private because I'm essentially only using it here. So I'm going to rename it. Am I sexy all? That means that it's going to be completely ignored. Not sure if you can see, but it's grayed out. Yeah, that means that, hey, no one is invoking it. So now let's create a function, am I sexy? That's the method I want to display. All right, so first of all, let's do a smoke test. Hello. Yeah? See if it works. It doesn't work, it's refreshing, it does work. Yeah? Hello. All right. So that's the way you create a stateless component, just a function that returns a piece of HTML or JSX to be a bit more precise. All right. So how do we initialize the state? Essentially, I'm going to replicate the constructor. Yeah? I'm going to translate the constructor into a stateless component. So that's a bit weird the first time you see that. And actually, to explain that, I need to go back in time and explain something else. If I have an array of fruits, of scores, right? So you're playing with the Codery platform, and then you have scores equals 10 and 20. These are your scores of the week. Well, let's be a bit more positive. 70 and 80, right? JavaScript challenge on Monday and React challenge on Friday, for instance. And I want to create an app to display the results of the week, right? So can I say something like that? So can I do, let me get rid of that. First score. Oh.
I think all the power's gone out because my laptop's not charging as well.
Oh, that's a bit inconvenient. All right, so we ran out of. Yeah, so I think it's because of the heaters.
Yeah, the stream's still on.
Yes, you can see it doesn't smell good, right? So we need to be a bit careful with these things, guys. So I'm sure this one died.
It's still going up.
It will take some other time like that. All right.
That's good.
So I'll try to fix that later. No, I think the whole thing. Is everything there actually?
Laptop, protected this socket, that top, and then you just
Yes, yes, the light was for the workshop we can do that. It's here. No, it's over here. So, at least for now.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, do you reckon the fuse?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
well, the lights went off. What about the kettle?
What?
Yeah. I just thought this is still all being streamed on YouTube right now.
thank you, will try to look after electricity. That happens every single year. We need to be extremely careful with the number of heaters. I mean, we can have as many heaters as you want. That's not a problem. So you're not going to be cold. The only thing is we cannot plug 3 heaters to the same plug to the same thingy, because otherwise it will explode, right? So I'll review all the infrastructure later on. Let's continue with the workshop if possible. And if my laptop doesn't die, we got 71% of battery. So let's. Anyone seen the remote control? That's a bit weird. It's in my pocket, sorry. All right, so 70% battery, no pressure. Cool. So I think this is still recording, by the way. Yeah, nice, brilliant. Okay, so it's going to be a bit strange. All right, so anyone confirm it's still recording?
Yeah, it's okay.
Cool, perfect. So we were talking about that, right? So we got an array of scores. So how can we display the first score? Score square bracket 0. Like that? Wrong. Like that? Cool. And how do we display a second score? Pretty much the same thing, right? Scores 1. Yeah, so that's okay. That's okay. However, in JavaScript, there is something very sexy called array destructuring. So, technically speaking, you can create a variable, first score equals score 0, right? And then you can create another variable called second score, and then scores 1. So then I can display first score, and I can display second score. So that's the way we've been dealing with these issues historically, yeah? And that's all good, it still works. However, there is a way to do that in one single line. Look, you can do that. First score, comma, second score. You see? That line is equivalent to these 2 lines. Note the brackets. The brackets means A. I know score is an array, so that means get the first element of the array and save it into a new variable called first score. And likewise, get the second value of the array and save it into the second score variable. Yeah? So you can do that, and that should eventually, if I refresh, what is it? Here we go. Yeah, eventually it works, right? So why I'm talking to that? Because hooks works based on this principle. With hooks, let's initialize our state. So again, that's a bit weird, so please pay attention. You see, we can import React. This is what we are doing all the time. And then we can do comma, curly braces, use state. So use state is the mechanism introduced by React to deal with state in a function, in a stateless component. And then what? Then look, you can create a variable using array destructuring. And the variable will look like that. We can pass two variables. First of all, the name of your state variable, so I would like to call it message, for instance. And then the second element of the array will be a method to update the message. So generally speaking, we call set message. Yeah? So first the variable, and then the method to update the variable. Equals use state. Inside of use state, we can set up the initial value of the message. Hello. And now we can simply display the message. That's it. So that's the way you initialize the state in React. So let's see if it works. There you go. You got hello. Some of you may be thinking, why do we need all this complexity? Why don't we do let message equals hello? Yeah? Why don't we do that? Still works, right? So that line, number 8, is much simpler than line number 7. So why do we do that? We do that because of what we said yesterday and Friday. Thanks to the state, React will re-render. No state change, no re-render. So let me present you the next problem. If the only thing we want to do is that, static message, we don't need a state. Of course, we don't need it. But if we want to interact with it, we need it. So let me add a new example. Remember on Friday, we updated the message after 3 seconds. So that's what I would like to do now. Yeah? So we've already, actually, we can get the same text. So we got the constructor already translated. Let's translate the component in mount. First of all, let's do it in the wrong way. So this is not going to work, I believe. So in the wrong way will be A. And even if that works, that's wrong. So let's have a look. After 3 seconds, message equals yes you are. You see, I'm essentially trying to imitate what we did on Friday. That's what happened. If I refresh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we can stay here until Brexit, right? It's not going to change because that's wrong. Why this is wrong? Let me rephrase the question. Can anyone tell me how many times this component will be rendered? How many times line number 14 will run? Once? Twice? Only once. That's correct. So the component will render once, and that's it. Will line number 11 run? Yes, some people said yes, some people say no.
We have to recognize it as a change.
Line number 11 will run. Of course it will run. So the function runs once.
But
Everything.
nothing will be displayed.
Wait, the function runs once, and it will display once. Because it runs once, it will run this timeout. So it will run that line. If I add an alert, here I am. After 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, the pop-up is there. So it runs. However, even if it runs, updating the message is not going to force a re-render. That's why it doesn't work, right? Did you remember on Friday that the first thing we tried to do is this.state.message equals hello? Did that work? No, because that was not the way we told React, please re-render. That's why that didn't work. So that's pretty much the same example. That's not the way we tell React, please re-render. So if that's not the way, what's the correct way? Using a hook, use a state. See? So that's the way you initialize the variable message. So can anyone tell me how can I tell React now, after 3 seconds, please update my user interface? Set message, correct. This is the new message. That's it. So now, if I refresh, 1, 2, 3. This is the new message. That's the way you update code in React. In other words, these lines of code are completely equivalent to these lines of code at the bottom. And I hope you agree with me that the code on top is simpler compared to the code at the bottom. That's why hooks became so popular so quickly. For now. Yeah. So what the original goal of hooks was to try to introduce some sort of basic state handling on components. Basic. That means if you have a complex component with many state changes, hooks will become harder to maintain. Okay? But then the question is, why do you have a complex component? Maybe it will be a good opportunity to split it into smaller subcomponents. But that's a different story, right? So long story short, if your component is simple, hooks work like a charm. Fantastic. So that's a scenario number 1, where after 3 seconds, we updated the user interface. Let me go back to the class. I want to bring the button example. Not sure if you remember it. So on the class, we remove the component did mount. And now, before going that far, there is something important to note here. Sorry, let me go back because I think this is important. So we can see that works, right? But now the question is, how many times line number 10 will run?
Twice. So once, just after 3 seconds.
Let's have a look. So I'm going to add a break. You'll see in a minute my point, right? So first of all, once again, let's do a bit of debugging, which is a very healthy exercise. Let's see if it works. So I'm adding breakpoint. I'll zoom it in a second. So I'm adding a breakpoint on line number 13. That will run twice for sure. And then let's add another breakpoint on this line. All right. So it renders once. Let's see if Google Chrome helps me. Here you go. So it renders once. Can I zoom it a bit more? Yes. Here you go. All right. So it renders once. That's fine. And then one. Oh, what is my breakpoint? Yeah, after 3 seconds, it stops there, and then it will re-render. All right, I got tired of Google Chrome, guys. I'm sorry about that. I will never use it again. Let's go to Safari. All right, so Safari.
Just what you're doing now, what is the normal industry standard for a web developer to test stuff on? Is there usually one, or is it just personal preference?
Say it again, sorry?
So if you're working as a professional web developer, is there an industry standard that most people test their code on first for a browser, or is it just a all down to personal preference?
Well, there is, yeah, of course, there are some standards. So if you go to gs.statcounter.com, so that will tell you the market share of each web browser, right? So that one on top is Google Chrome. So they got 65% of the market. That thing at the bottom is Affari. They got 16% of the market. And then you got everything else, way, all the way at the bottom, right? Interestingly enough, if you go back in time, that sometimes doesn't work because of all the amount of data it needs to process. But if we are lucky enough today, we'll hopefully see the progression of the web browser wars. Here you go. Yeah. This is only starting from 2009. If you could go back to time to 1995, you'll see many weird things here, right? But anyway, I think it's pretty obvious that Google Chrome, yeah, it used to be a really good browser, but every new version gets worse. Many people think that Google Chrome is the new IE, is the new Internet Explorer. Yeah? However, Safari, I've never been a big fan of Safari, but at least it's way more stable. Yeah? To me, there is something fundamental. When I play with software, I don't really mind if it's easy or hard or hard to deal with. The important thing is, if I run the same action 10 times, it should return the same thing 10 times. It's pretty fundamental. If that doesn't work, I'm not going to use that software, right? And Safari works fine 9 out of 10. So not perfect, but slightly better. All right, so talking about Safari. Let me refresh the browser. Sorry, it's in the middle of another iteration. So yeah, let's refresh the browser and see how many times the breakpoints stop. So yeah, once again, I don't even think this is working fine because it's not stopping on line number 13. That's a bit unfortunate that Safari is getting worse as well. But even though, let me add a debugger because I think this is important, guys. Let me add a debugger. And again, it's not, please don't think it's an excuse, right? Don't go to your interviewer and say, no, I'm not using breakpoints because they failed, right? That's a horrible excuse of bad developers. So even if it doesn't work fine, we need to get used to them. All right, so look, you see, I've added, well, maybe can I zoom it a bit more? I added a debugger line. So thanks to that, we can see it's trying to render something, yeah? Here you go, you are not sexy. And now, after 3 seconds, you see, that's good, right? We stop on set message, fine. Now we render again. Does it make sense? And here you go, this is a new message, but hey, wait, it's going back again. You've seen that? And then after 3 seconds, it's back again. Is that expected? Right, no, right? Why is running the set timeout infinitely without a stop? Because every time you change the state, React will run the function again. That's the entire point, right, of changing the state. We want to refresh everything. That's why, even though that works, because at the end of the day, we only want to change the message once, but imagine there is something dynamic. Imagine we're calling the backend. You will call the backend starting on task number 18 or 19. Yeah? We don't want to call the backend all the time. Imagine that you are using your smartphone. It will run your data plan. Some particular actions should be triggered only once. Yeah? With the class, it actually worked well. Why? Because React only calls component in mount once. That's why we can be 100% sure we are changing the state only once. But using a hook, even though that works in this particular scenario, that's not the way you trigger one-off changes. So now the question is, how do we trigger one-off changes? The correct way to do that is by importing a new hook called useEffect. See, useEffect. And how does useEffect work? Look at the syntax. It's again a bit special. useEffect, we pass a callback function, and inside of the callback function, we do our magic. But now the point is, will that code run only once? Not yet. Not yet. Once again, every time we change the state, useEffect by default will trigger. So how do we fix the problem? How do we tell React, please run that piece of code only once, regardless of what happened? We can pass a second argument at the bottom. Look at what my cursor is on line number 13. With the list of properties we want to listen. So whenever any of these properties change, then we run that hook. In this particular case, we don't care about any property. We only want to run it once. So there is a convention in React. Whenever you want to run a hook only once, you pass an empty array. By passing an empty array, the code inside will run once, just once, only once. Let's add some breakpoints just to prove the theory. So if we run it again, you see the debugger, so it stops because it needs to render everything once. Now it goes inside of the hook, so that means it's going to re-render once. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. You see, we've changed the data, so we want to re-render. Let me zoom in a bit more. We want to re-render, but now it should never ever stop on line number 10. 1, 2, 3, 3 million seconds waiting. Yeah? It will never update the state again. Why? Because we told React, hey, this is a one-off action. Only trigger it once. Of course, in some particular scenarios, we may want to react to some changes. Yeah? But that goes beyond the scope of this session. At least the important thing is to note how do we update the state once and only once. Any questions?
Why do we have to put empty array?
Why? Because that's a convention. It's what React wants. If you in here you pass an array of properties you want to listen to. So whenever any of these properties changes, React will run the hook. Yeah? Again, it goes beyond the scope of the session to play with advanced scenarios. But for now, let's learn the most simple one. And the most simplistic one is, if you pass an empty array, that means you don't want to listen for anything. You want to trigger it only once. All right, so that's the first example. That's the correct way to change the state only once. Yeah? Imagine that you need to call the backend. That's a typical scenario. You'll have to do that on, again, task number 18, 19. So when you call the backend, you only want to do it once. You only want to call an API once, not every 3 seconds, right? So that hook is what you need to do. All right, and now, as promised before, let me go back to the class example, which is going to be a bit simpler this time. So, do you remember when we added a button? So let me do that again. So with a button, here, we managed to toggle the message. If you remember, does anyone remember how to add a click event to the button?
On click.
On click, fantastic, Joshua. And then what?
Equal.
equal, and then what?
Curly brackets.
Yeah, and then what?
This set state dot message.
Callback function.
Oh yeah.
Callback function. Now, how do we write the callback function? Brackets, like that? No. Parentheses, maybe? And then what? A method. This dot toggle sexy. Yeah? So now we can add a toggle sexy method. And as part of the toggle sexy method, we can get rid of the component in mount. So let's just, instead of toggle it, let's say update sexy message, right? So once I click on the button, how do we change the state on a stateful component, guys?
Set state.
Correct, Simon. Set state, and then what?
And then inside the open brace.
Brace?
No, like open this round one. How it goes.
Parentheses, guys. It's not that complicated.
And brace now.
Yeah, and now the new message, right? So that's what we did on Friday. And here we need to call the function, of course. So let's see if it works. Where is my Safari? Here you go. You see? You are not sexy. I click on the button, message updated. Yeah, so that's the way we deal with user-related changes. And as I told you last week, that's a bit weird. You remember that syntax? Function, and then you call another function, and then you have your method here. In other words, every time we need to deal with the lexical this that we'll cover on the last week of the bootcamp, we are in danger of failing miserably. Yeah? So that's another advantage of stateless components and hooks. The word this doesn't exist here. So we are less likely to have troubles. So how do we solve the problem? How do we solve the problem with a stateless component? Once again, let's create a button. Let's do the on-click. So that's the same thing, right? But now, the on-click method got simpler. I don't need to do that. I can do that. If I want, I can do that. Actually, let's do that as a first test. Okay? So now we can just create a variable. We can create a function here, update message. You see, I got a function inside of my function. So now, how do we update the message, guys?
All the set message function.
Set message, and then Sarah is right.
Yeah.
Slightly simpler. Let's see if it works. First of all, let's bring the new component back. So am I sexy, and then the class is am I sexy old, for instance, yeah? All right, so you are not, what I am? You are not sexy, and if I click again, well, I got the debugger still running, so let's remove the breakpoints for the time being. You see? As soon as I click on the button, then the message is back, yeah? So we've managed to find a way to build the same behavior. And we can make it even simpler. Whenever you have data structure, so you have a function that calls another function, if you want, you can simply do that. That's it, yeah? Even simpler. So we are saving a reference to the function. In other words, whenever the user clicks on the button, please call this function. And if we run it again, still works. Yeah? So I hope you agree with me that this snippet is much simpler than dealing with this complexity, this dot, this set state. Yeah? So that's the recommended way of dealing with these scenarios. There are different ways of creating functions like this one. This is completely valid, it works, so take it if you want. I know some developers, they like to do that. They like to create a constant, you may have seen that, and the constant is actually a function. So this is the same as that.
I'm writing like this. Is this fine?
Yeah. They're pretty much the same thing. Yeah, just to show you different coding styles. Because what happens if you learn that, and then suddenly you see that code? It's like, oh, what the hell is that? Who did that, right? And one of the subtle advantages of using a function like that is that you remember what we explained in last coding challenge review, that whenever you have an arrow function like this one, we can get rid. Yeah, so we can put it inline.
It's much shorter.
Much shorter. Agree on that. So now, if we refresh, still works. Does it make sense?
So why don't you need a callback function anymore?
Why do you need a callback function?
In the on-click bit.
All right. No, I mean, okay, so what do you propose?
No,
What-
I just mean, because I thought before you had to put a callback function, otherwise like the button would automatically.
Yeah, so we needed before to do that with the stateful component. You see? We needed a callback function. Why? Because without it, JavaScript won't be able to save a reference to lexical this. However, because here in a stateless component, because we don't have the this word, that problem is gone. Yeah? Because the problem is gone, you can do that. Of course, if you prefer, you can also do that. Look, you can update the state straight away without creating another function. You see? So whenever I click on the button, then update my message. That's literally the same thing, and still works. So that's pretty much it for now about stateless components and hooks. I understand it's a bit shocking the first time, but once you get used to it, it just simplifies your life. Yeah? Because it invites you to create simplistic components. In other words, with the stateful components, with classes, you are likely to have a big chunk of code. With the stateless components, it's almost impossible to have a big chunk of code, because at some point, the code will be very hard to maintain. So you will quickly realize that this is now a good opportunity to split your component into smaller ones. And that's the way your platform can scale. Yeah? Rather than having a huge component with 500 lines, then have 50 components of 10 lines each. Much easier to deal with. Any questions, guys? No? So once again, from now on, my suggestion is start creating a stateful component just to make sure you really understand how it works. And once you solve it, then delete it or keep it there as a copy, right? Keep it there, but then rewrite it again using hooks. Yeah, once again, if you go to a job interview and use a class, it's okay. But if you use a hook like that, use a state and use effect, you prove what's going on in React. This is very new. Yeah? So don't forget that the company is not expecting you to know many things, but at least the few things you know should be relevant, should be new. Yeah? Companies may not know, or even if they've heard about, I'm sure some companies may have not been introducing things like flex or grid or hooks. And I'm sure they are really keen to bring these new things to their projects. So please prove you know that, you know these things. Even if you don't have the opportunity to do a test and prove, just in a face-to-face interview, what do you know about React? express these things, right? Because this is very valuable today.
One question, Karen.
Go for it.
You've got state message changes. When you had 3 or 4 states that you need to record, so you have to have a state set, state report. How would they express it and allow us recommended practice?
Yeah, so we can have multiple state properties. So for instance, we can have message and we can have day of the week. Yeah, and then set day of week. So we can say that by default this is Monday. So, and then on the message, let's try to change the message a bit. So the message will be hello and the day will be Monday, right? So if I click on the button, and actually it will be now a good opportunity to call the update message because I want to change 2 messages in one go. So first of all, I set the message to how are you? And then I'll set, let me display the day of the week. So message colon message, and then day of the week, day of week, right? So how are you? And then set day of the week, Tuesday, right? So of course, we can change multiple state properties at the same time. So message hello, day of the week, Monday. Let me add a break line in between just for readability purposes. So message, and then day of the week. Let's see if that works slightly better. Here you go, right? So message hello, day of the week, Monday. So if I click on the button, it changes both properties. Does that make sense? Of course, we're talking about the strings, but we may have an object here. It works as well. Yeah, so any type of data.
So we can use here another hook like use reducer.
Like what?
Reducer.
Red user.
Yes.
What that means?
Reduce function. Reduce function.
You know the hook.
Yeah,
Use reducer.
but I'm not getting the question.
No. Okay.
Can you spell that?
Use
Use state.
reducer.
I'm sorry, Simon. I'm literally lost. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's discuss that offline.
Okay.
Anything else? No? Cool. So that was it for today, guys. Thank you.